An old man walks into a bank, claims it's his, and drops a sack of ancient cash on the floor. What happens next will blow your mind. Don't miss this unbelievable story. The small town of Brooksville sat under a lazy, sun-drenched afternoon, a place where nothing much ever changed, and the streets echoed with the comfort of routine. People passed by with quiet familiarity, as if the world outside had no real bearing on their peaceful lives. Inside the bustling local bank, however, an air of monotony was about to be shattered. The door swung open with a jarring creak, and in stepped a man. He wasn't tall, nor striking, nor sharply dressed. His weathered face was partially concealed beneath the rim of a faded baseball cap, and his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of a large, tattered sack slung across his back. The sack seemed too heavy for his frail frame, stained with the marks of wear and time. His boots, scuffed and caked with dirt, clapped against the polished tile with each step. But no one in the bank took notice, not at first. It was a quiet afternoon, and a man with a sack, stumbling into the bank, didn't even register as unusual. A couple of customers, sitting idly in the corner, didn't bother to look up. A young teller, her hair pulled into a tight ponytail, gave him a glance before quickly turning her attention back to her computer screen. The bank was familiar to her, a place of daily routines, deposits, withdrawals, loan inquiries, and there was nothing about today that promised to be different, until the man reached the center of the room, lifting his head just enough to meet the eyes of everyone in the lobby. His expression was unreadable, like he'd seen far too much in life to be easily disturbed. Yet there was something about his gaze, something almost dangerous in its calm. And then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying an undercurrent of authority that seemed to freeze the moment. "This bank is mine," he said, the word simple, clear, and as steady as the worn-out wood of an old farmhouse porch. For a moment, silence lingered. It was a low chuckle from a nearby customer that broke it, followed by a few more. The young teller exchanged a glance with her co-worker, barely hiding her grin. The man, old and ragged as he was, had made an absurd claim. Who in their right mind would believe it? But despite the laughter echoing in the room, there was something about the way he stood, unshaken by the mockery, that made her pause. She watched him, wondering for just a brief second if there was more to him than just a poor, forgotten man he appeared to be. He didn't wait for anyone to ask him what he meant. Instead, he shifted the sack on his shoulder and with a deliberate motion, let it drop heavily to the floor. The sound it made was enough to make the laughter fade, swallowed by the weight of that single unexpected noise. The moment the old man's words echoed in the air, the room shifted, though no one could quite place why. Laughter rippled through the bank like a wave, but there was something hollow about it, something off. Lila, a 24-year-old teller with a soft laugh and bright eyes, leaned toward her co-worker. Sarah, her hand covered her mouth to stifle the giggles. "Did he just say this bank is his?" she whispered, barely able to suppress her amusement. Sarah smirked, shaking her head. It was a strange thing to say, especially coming from a man who looked like he hadn't seen a proper meal in weeks. But the absurdity of it didn't escape anyone's notice. The old man's clothes, dirty and threadbare, had seen better days, and his wrinkled face told a story of someone who had lived far too long in the shadows of the world. A figure who was meant to blend into background, not stand in the center of a bank and make impossible claims. A chuckle erupted from a customer seated near the back. "Yeah, right," he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm the mayor." The others laughed along, as if it were all some grand joke, the man's outlandish proclamation a fitting punchline to the dull monotony of the afternoon. But not everyone was laughing. At the front of the room, Marcus, the head of security, folded his arms across his broad chest and stepped forward. His presence was solid, physically imposing, a man who had seen 100 disturbances in his time. But this was different. Something about the old man's voice, his unwavering conviction, made him pause, just for a moment. "Sir," Marcus said, his tone measured, tried to defuse the situation with a calm that was growing harder to maintain. "I think you might be confused. Why don't we get you some help?" He spoke slowly, careful not to escalate things, but his hand hovered near his radio, just in case. The old man didn't budge. His eyes, though tired, held a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished by laughter or mockery. He didn't seem bothered by their disbelief. Instead, his smile, the faintest of smiles, grew slightly, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment, this exact reaction. "I'm not confused," he said again, his voice still calm, but now edged with something more certainty. "This bank belongs to me." The laughter started to falter, the crowd's mockery turning into a confused murmur. Lila looked over at Sarah, the humor in her eyes slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Something about this didn't sit right. The old man shifted his sack slightly and let it fall to the floor with a heavy thud. It was a sound that broke the last threads of their amusement, the sound that reminded them this man, whatever his story, wasn't just some forgotten soul. He was holding their attention now, and it felt like the ground beneath them had shifted, just a little. Marcus, the head of security, stood tall as ever, but now his posture seemed just a little less certain. He glanced around the room, noticing the change in atmosphere, a subtle shift from laughter to something else. Maybe it was the way the old man hadn't backed down his unshakable presence, or maybe it was the fact that nobody in the room was laughing anymore. Either way, Marcus felt the air tighten. He took a step closer, his boots making a steady thud on the marble floor. "Sir," he said, trying to keep his voice firm but gentle, "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside for a moment. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding, and we'll get this sorted out. But I need you to sit down while I call someone to help." His hand hovered near his belt, the radio clip just out of reach. But the old man didn't budge. Instead, he tilted his head to the side, his wrinkled face unreadable as he gave Marcus a long, steady look, like he'd seen this all before. Maybe he had. The man had a way about him that made Marcus feel, for just a second, that he wasn't in control of the situation. "Sit down?" the old man asked, his voice steady, almost amused. "I'm not here to sit down, son. I'm here to stand my ground." A small murmur of surprise rippled through the bank. Some of the customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The silence hung for just a moment longer before a cough broke it, just enough to remind everyone this was, in fact, a bank, and things were getting strange. Marcus shook his head, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right, let's just take a breath here," he said, trying to diffuse the tension with his usual calm. He motioned to one of the tellers. "Lila, please call the manager. Let's get this sorted out." Lila hesitated for just a moment, her fingers hovering over the phone. But as she looked at the old man again, something in her gut told her that this wasn't just some confused, crazy old man. There was a certain stillness about him, like he wasn't just an outsider here. He was something more, something important. Behind the counter, Sarah, who had been quietly watching, leaned over to Lila. "Is it just me, or is this guy kind of commanding?" she whispered, eyes wide. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm starting to feel like we should be paying him instead of the other way around." Lila let out a nervous laugh, the tension in the air easing just a little, but it didn't last long. Marcus cleared his throat, still trying to get things back under control. "Sir," he said, "please, we just need to make a call and get things straight. You're not in any trouble. Just let's keep things calm, all right?" The old man stood silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he shrugged slowly and let out a sigh. "All right, son," he said with a glint of mischief in his eyes, "but don't say I didn't warn you." He stood still, almost as if he was waiting for the inevitable shift to come. The room was tense now, the playful energy of earlier completely gone, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still hovering near his radio. The old man's bag, seemingly just a sack of junk, now felt like it was holding something far more important than anyone had expected. He could see the flicker of curiosity in the eyes of the customers around him. No one was laughing now. With a slow, deliberate motion, the man bent down and lifted the sack off the ground. For a moment, the whole bank held its breath as he unwrapped it, as if the entire room was waiting for a grand revelation. His fingers were gnarled, his movements slow, but measured. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he pulled open the top of the bag and let its contents spill onto the floor. The heavy thud of the paper bundles hitting the marble floor was a sound that everyone in the room felt in their bones. And for a moment, no one spoke. Bundles of cash, faded, Old bills, tightly wrapped with paper bands, poured out like a slow-moving waterfall, tumbling onto the floor in neat stacks. Some of the money was so old it looked like it had crumbled at the slightest touch. Others had clearly been handled by countless hands over the years, the edges frayed and curling. The room seemed to grow even quieter, the weight of the moment settling on everyone. "Wow, what is this?" Marcus stammered, his voice shaky, eyes fixed on the money. A woman standing near the entrance gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The old man, undisturbed, looked up at him and gave a small, knowing smile. "It's all real," he said, his voice low and almost nostalgic. "This is what I built. Before your time. Before any of you were born." Sarah, one of the younger tellers, took a hesitant step closer to the scattered bills. She was skeptical, but couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a grand joke. These are real, aren't they?" Her voice trembled a little, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Sure are," the man replied, his voice thick with history. "You won't see these around here anymore. But back in the day, this was how we did business. All the transactions, all the records, everything." Lila, standing by the counter, couldn't stop staring at the sight. But how?" she whispered. "How is this possible?" The old man's eyes narrowed for a second, as if recalling a long-forgotten past. "I built this place. It was mine, before anyone ever heard of Chase Bank." The realization hit the room like a cold breeze. One by one, people began to move closer to the spilled money, unsure whether to touch it, afraid to make a move. It felt like they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't quite comprehend, something that had been buried for far too long. The bank's manager, Ryan, who had been standing at the back of the room, finally moved forward. His face, which had once been calm and collected, was now twisted with confusion. His eyes darted from the old man to the scattered bundles of cash on the floor, his hands gripping the edge of the counter as if the whole room might collapse beneath him. What is this?" Ryan finally managed to choke out, his voice shaky. He crouched down, carefully picking up one of the old bills, the texture almost crumbling in his fingers. "This can't be real. This money's ancient." The old man, who had been standing so still it was as though time itself had paused for him, gave Ryan a slow, almost pitying smile. "What do you think? It's real enough for you to be asking about it, isn't it?" Ryan looked up, stunned. He blinked rapidly. Then his eyes flicked to the ledger that had also spilled out of the bag, its pages yellowing with age, the leather cover cracked but still holding together like a stubborn old man's memory. Ryan's hand trembled as he reached for it. As soon as his fingers touched the cover, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He opened it carefully, flipping to the brittle pages, his eyes scanning the faded ink. "C.K. Kirby," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. The name stood out in the book like a bright, unforgiving beacon. He stared at it, unsure what to make of it, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just some old relic. This was something that had to mean something. "It's him, isn't it?" Sarah whispered to Lila, her voice barely a breath. "This man, the C.K. Kirby, he's the founder of the bank, the one who started it all." Lila leaned in closer, her curiosity piqued. "No way. But why? Why hasn't anyone heard of him? Why would he disappear?" Ryan glanced up, his face pale as he saw the realization dawning on the other employees. One by one, they began to piece the puzzle together. The old man was no joke. He was a living piece of the bank's history, a man who had been erased and forgotten, his legacy buried under years of corporate gloss and greed. Ryan's voice came out in a hushed whisper, a little stunned. "But how is this possible? This is history. This is real." The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he just nodded, as if he had been waiting for that exact reaction. He had known all along this moment would come. "I built this bank," he said again, his voice steady but carrying a weight of finality. "And I'll take it back, all of it." The customers who had been standing at the edges of the room now edged closer, each of them drawn to the scene unfolding in front of them. Some looked on with disbelief, others with cautious curiosity. Whatever they had thought about the old man before, they couldn't deny the truth standing right before them now. Ryan swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the ledger. This changes everything." And as the room fell into silence, the old man gave a final nod, his expression unreadable, as if he had already made peace with the truth he'd been carrying for so long. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing. He was finally being seen. As Ryan continued to flip through the old ledger, his mind raced. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the signature that had been so casually scrawled on the last page. C.K. Kirby. The ink was faded, but it was unmistakable. This was no hoax. This was real. He looked up at the old man who was standing there, his hands clasped together with the kind of calm that made Ryan feel like a child caught in a lie. The old man wasn't hurried. He wasn't pleading. He was just waiting. "I don't understand," Ryan said, his voice quiet but urgent. "How did you disappear? You were here. You were the one who built this, and now, all these years later, you're telling me it was taken from you." The old man's eyes gleamed a mixture of sorrow and quiet rage, but his voice remained even. "Betrayal, son," he said slowly. "I built this place with my bare hands, but one day, my so-called partner decided he wanted it all. Greed does funny things to a man. All it took was a few whispers in the right ears. One day, I found myself out in the cold, my name erased in the records, my future stolen." A deep silence fell over the bank. Ryan had heard about shady deals and corporate backstabbing before, but hearing from a man who had once owned it all, it hit differently. "Your partner, John Williams, he did this?" Ryan asked, almost as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle, the pieces slowly falling into place in his mind. The old man nodded slowly, his face grim. "John Williams, yes. We started it together, built this bank from nothing, just the two of us. But one day, he saw the opportunity. He made sure the board saw me as unfit, made sure the money was his, and just like that, he snapped his fingers, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. I was gone." Ryan's gaze flicked toward the customers who had gathered in quiet all around the old man. Some were looking at the spilled money, others at the ledger in Ryan's hands. And then there were a few who looked downright uncomfortable, as if they were seeing the ghosts of their own pasts. "This is insane," Sarah, one of the tellers, muttered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This isn't just a story, is it? This is history." The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave her a knowing look, as if he had expected the question all along. "I fought for years, but the doors kept closing," he continued. "And one day, they made me disappear." Ryan swallowed hard. "And now you want it back?" The old man nodded, his eyes narrowing with quiet resolve. "I'm not here to beg, son. I'm here to take what's mine." Ryan stood there for a moment, caught between disbelief and awe. The truth was unraveling before him, layer by layer, and there was no going back now. What had seemed like a far-fetched story, an old man with a sack and a wild tale, was turning into something much bigger than he ever imagined. But as the gravity of the moment settled in, one thing was clear. The past was coming back to claim what had been stolen from it. Ryan stared at the old man, his mind reeling as the weight of the situation settled in. C.K. Kirby, the founder of this very bank, standing before him. How had it come to this? But before he could process everything, the silence in the room was broken by a voice, a calm but firm voice that came from the back of the room. Ryan called Mark, the assistant manager, who had been watching from the sidelines, trying to make sense of the unfolding scene. "What's going on here? This guy really claiming to be C.K. Kirby?" Ryan turned to Mark, still gripping the ledger in his hands. "He is Kirby," Ryan said, his voice low but steady, the shock beginning to wear off. "The papers, they check out. The name matches, the signatures, everything." Mark's eyes widened in disbelief, his eyebrows shooting up as if he was trying to see through the haze of confusion. "No way. You mean to tell me that this guy built this place, and we've been, what? Living a lie all these years?" He gestured at the ornate chandelier overhead, the gleaming marble floors beneath their feet. "Everything we've worked for, it's built on his foundation, his legacy." The realization hit hard, the humdrum daily tasks of the bank now completely irrelevant in the face of this history. The other tellers, who had been standing silently, began to murmur among themselves. Some would just try to wrap their heads around it. Others were exchanging nervous glances, unsure whether they should believe what they were hearing or write it off as a tall tale. C.K. Kirby didn't seem fazed by the growing crowd. Instead, he stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes distant. The old man wasn't here for the spectacle. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to reclaim what was once his. And in some strange way, Ryan realized he was about to watch history unfold before him. Mark, still processing, shook his head, trying to make light of the situation. "So, what's the plan now, Kirby?" he asked with a forced chuckle. "Are we handing you the keys to the place? You want to open up your own vault again?" The humor in his voice was thin, a nervous laugh more than anything else. C.K. Kirby didn't smile. "The keys are long gone," he said with a faint sigh. "But the vault, that's a different story. I've been waiting a long time to get the truth back." Ryan looked at Mark, then back to Kirby. The weight of the moment hit him again. This wasn't just a story of theft or corporate sabotage. This was about justice, about righting a wrong that had been buried for decades. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that comes just before the storm, the kind that precedes a reckoning, where everything finally makes sense, and the path forward is no longer in question. As C.K. Kirby's words hung in the air, Ryan realized something crucial. The game had changed. There was no turning back. The silence stretched as C.K. Kirby's words settled in the room like an unexpected thunderclap. Ryan stood there, still holding the ledger, the weight of what Kirby had just said slowly sinking in. Betrayed. It was one thing to hear stories about corporate backstabbing, but hearing it from a man who had actually been wronged, it hit harder. What happened after that? Ryan asked quietly, his voice still shaking a little, as though he wasn't sure if he wanted to know the full truth. Kirby didn't immediately answer. He looked down at the floor, his old, wrinkled hands tracing the edge of the sack on the ground, as if it held the remnants of his past. When he spoke again, his voice was low and steady, the anger from earlier replaced by a sorrow that seemed to haunt him more than anything. "After John Williams turned on me, I fought for years," Kirby said, his gaze lifting, his eyes piercing into Ryan's. "I tried to get my name back, my bank, but no one would listen. They closed their doors. I was too much of a problem. Every lawyer I hired told me the same thing, that it was over, that I'd lost." He paused, and for a moment the whole room was still. The young tellers exchanged glances, and a few customers shifted uneasily in their seats. The man who had built the very place they were standing in had been erased, as if his legacy had never existed at all. And then one day, Kirby continued, his voice soft but firm, "They made me disappear. I woke up one morning and found myself erased from the records, like I was never even here. My name? Gone. My work? Gone." Ryan swallowed hard, the weight of the truth settling deeper. "And you fought for all those years, until you just disappeared?" Kirby nodded. "That's right. They wanted me to vanish, to die without leaving a trace. But I couldn't. I didn't just give up. I kept fighting in every way I could. I found out what I could from the shadows. But I had to bide my time, wait for the right moment." Ryan stood there, lost in the old man's story, not sure whether to feel pity, awe, or anger. But there was something else, too. Something about Kirby's resilience. He had been cast aside, ignored, and forgotten, but he was still standing. And he was here now, facing the people who had tried to bury his past. The old man gave a small, dry laugh. "They thought they could keep me down forever. They didn't know me very well." Ryan's mind raced. There was more to this than just a fight for ownership. This was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and the truth. The battle had never just been about money. It had been about everything the old man had built with his own hands. And now, it was finally time to take it back. The tension in the room was palpable now. The scattered bills on the floor and the faded ledger told a story that no one in the bank could ignore anymore. The customers stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The young tellers exchanged nervous glances, their earlier skepticism replaced by a growing sense of disbelief. Ryan's heart pounded as he looked at the old man, whose face was calm but firm, a quiet storm behind his eyes. C.K. Kirby had spoken with such conviction, detailing how he had been betrayed, how his legacy had been stolen. And now, standing here in the very building he'd built, he had one last chance to reclaim it all. Those papers, Ryan started, his voice barely above a whisper. He still couldn't quite wrap his head around what had happened. What was happening now? They proved that you never sold the bank, that Williams. He took it from you. He was almost speaking to himself now, trying to process the weight of the situation. Kirby nodded slowly. Those papers tell the truth. And the truth has a way of coming back, even after years of being buried under lies. His gaze swept across the room, his eyes meeting the faces of the employees and customers who had been so quick to dismiss him just moments before. Truth has a funny way of surviving, don't it? Ryan was quiet for a moment, thinking. He looked at the old bills on the floor, the pages of the ledger that had once been a symbol of his history. But now it was clear it was a symbol of something far greater. It was a reminder what could happen when a man's work, his life's creation, was stolen by greed and deceit. And here, standing in front of him, was a man who had lived through it, fought through it, and, despite everything, was still fighting. You didn't just lose a business, Ryan said, his voice gaining strength. You lost your name. Your legacy. That's the worst part, isn't it? The erasure. Kirby looked at him, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. That's the hardest part, yes. When they take everything from you and convince the world you never existed in the first place. But here's the thing, Ryan, no one can take your truth. His voice dropped slightly, a gravitas to it now. And once the truth comes out, it doesn't matter how much time has passed. It doesn't matter how deep they bury it. It will always rise back up. Ryan stood there, his thoughts racing, and in that moment, it wasn't just about the bank anymore. It was about integrity, about standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The old man had fought for years, and now, in front of him, was a man who refused to let his past be erased, no matter the cost. Kirby didn't need to explain further. His eyes told the story. Truth can't be stolen. It can only be hidden. The weight of the moment hung in the air like a heavy fog, pressing down on everyone in the room. The old man, C.K. Kirby, stood still, his eyes never leaving the ledger in Ryan's hands. There was a deep silence that followed, a moment of reckoning. The laughter had long faded, replaced by the soft murmurs of disbelief. The truth, long buried, had resurfaced, and there was no turning back now. Ryan looked up at the old man, still trying to grasp the enormity of what had just been revealed. He glanced at the customers, who were now watching him closely, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. They were all waiting for him to act, waiting for him to decide what came next. Ryan felt the weight of their eyes, but he also felt something else, the weight of his own conscience. This wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about who owned the bank or who had the legal right to claim it. This was about something much deeper, justice, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. He turned back to C.K. Kirby, whose expression hadn't wavered. The old man wasn't asking for pity, and he wasn't demanding a handout. He was asking for the one thing that had been stolen from him, his legacy. You've been waiting for this moment for a long time, haven't you? Ryan asked quietly, his voice filled with a mix of respect and realization. Kirby nodded slowly, his eyes steady. Waiting a long time. But the truth doesn't age. It doesn't fade. It waits for the right moment to be seen again. Ryan took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the ledger. He could feel the truth of Kirby's words. The truth never really disappears. It waits. And now, it had come back to claim what was rightfully its own. All right, Ryan said, his voice steady, now filled with determination. This place, this bank, built on your blood, sweat, and dreams, it's yours. But the fight doesn't end here, does it? Kirby shook his head, a small but resolute smile crossing his face. No, son, the fight never ends. But for the first time in a long time, I can walk out of here with my head held high, knowing I've finally been seen. That's a victory in itself. Ryan nodded. He knew what he had to do. The next step wasn't just about reclaiming a bank or money. It was about making sure that what happened here today was never erased again, that the truth was never buried. He turned to the staff, his voice now firm. This isn't just about what was taken. It's about what we do with it now. The truth has been brought to light, and now we have to honor it together. As Ryan walked to the back office, Kirby's gaze followed him. For the first time in years, the weight of history no longer pressed down on him. The past had caught up to the present. And in that moment, he felt lighter than he had in decades. The battle wasn't over, but the first step had been taken.